thank you for joining me, Lara Quie, for the Legal Genie Podcast. As a former corporate lawyer and APAC head of business development for an international law firm, my mission with this podcast is to provide you with insights into the careers and lives of movers and shakers in the legal industry. Mentors are hard to come by, so by listening to these conversations, I hope that you will gain some valuable insights that will help you move forward in your career and personal life. I ask my guests to share their advice and experience with you. I ask them also to share about their mindset. As an executive coach, I work one-on-one with lawyers to grow their practice and self-confidence. I also run mastermind groups and business development accelerators designed to bring like-minded people together to learn, grow, and support each other. If you would like to learn more, please connect with me on LinkedIn or through my website. The details are in the show notes. Please rate and review the Legal Genie podcast to help us reach more people who may find it helpful. So let's move on to this week's episode. I hope that you enjoy the conversation. Hello and welcome to episode 18 of the Legal Genie podcast with me, your host, Lara Quie. Today, I'm delighted to be in conversation with Geoff Dunnett. Geoff is Managing Director and part of the founding team at Shieldpay, a payment solutions fintech company. Geoff is a qualified solicitor and practised as a project finance lawyer at Milbank, Tweed, Hadley and McCloy LLP and Mayer Brown International LLP, before working as an independent legal consultant to startups and as a business associate for the Techstars-Barclay's Tech Accelerator. Geoff has led the business and product development of Shieldpay's award-winning third-party managed account and corporate escrow offering, including building partnerships and gaining support of key industry stakeholders. It's great to have you on the podcast, Geoff.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, it's always good to start at the beginning. So tell me about your background and where you grew up.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate that I'm half French, half English. I grew up in Luxembourg and then came to school in the UK when I was 13. So I had a very international sort of bilingual upbringing. And then whilst at school here in the UK, I decided that I wanted to continue that passion for languages. And so I went on to study French and German at university and Spanish for a period as well. And then I had an amazing year in Erasmus as a year abroad. And that was really all of those experiences were very defining in terms of the outlook of life generally. But yeah, that's in a very short nutshell my background.
Well, we certainly have a lot in common then, because I also did French and German at university and had a year abroad in Germany, which I really enjoyed. And I was actually brought up in Spain, so I also speak Spanish.
Oh, indeed. That is a lot of coincidences.
Exactly. So I'm wondering about how you ended up choosing law, because I know why I did it.
Well, you might have to answer that question in a second too. But from my perspective, it was when I was leaving university, it was 2008. And we were in the midst of a financial crisis. And I think at the time, I always wanted to go into the world of business, in inverted commas, but without really knowing exactly what that meant or what that entailed, really. And I felt that at the time, choosing potentially a career in law would open more doors than it would close, and that it would give me a very strong foundation, professional foundation that would allow me to fall back on should I need it at any time in the future. That was really the motivation to begin with. And so I applied to law school on that basis, thinking, well, this will hopefully help my future journey. And so I got accepted to BPP for the GDL, the conversion course, for those who don't know what that is in the UK. And at the same time, then did a mini pupillage at barristers' chambers called 24 Old Buildings, a commercial set. And loved it, absolutely loved that experience over the summer prior to going to law school. And it's sort of, at that time, I still could not go to law school if I chose, but I decided that sort of validated 100% that I wanted to pursue this as a career and as an option. So that's how I then transitioned to doing the GDL, really, the conversion course. And unlike when you're working in that environment or that London-based GDL environment, many people have training contracts sort of arranged and set up prior to joining. And so they de-risk their approach of taking that quite large financial and time commitment to doing it over a very intense year. But I didn't have a training contract at the time. I did that pupillage, but then I spent that first year on the GDL furiously applying for training contracts at the same time as doing what is undoubtedly probably the most intense year of study I've ever done, but so rewarding in so many ways. To come out the other end of that, and I did get a training contract in the end, which was wonderful with Mayor Brown. And yeah, that was my entry into law. But that first year of the GDL should not be underestimated for anyone. It is a grueling path.
And interesting that you did the mini pupillage, though. So what was it about the barrister path that made you actually choose the solicitor route?
It's a very good question. For me, I found that I really wanted to work more as part of a team and work on those types of, I guess, wider practical aspects of the application of the law rather than necessarily purely the, I guess, more academic side of practice that comes with being a barrister. I think I also found that it requires a very special type of character to be a barrister, and I must confess, I think I probably wasn't academically strong enough or studious enough to really be a very strong or very successful barrister, particularly in the areas of law that I was interested in, where the competition is incredibly intense. And I found that my sort of skill set would be better suited as a solicitor. And I did have an ability to kind of question that, because my brother and my father were also solicitors, so it did help to kind of understand a little bit better of what the day-to-day there meant. That both of them didn't continue as such in the future, but they did both start at that point in some respects. My father longer than my brother, but yeah.
That's very good, though, that you had that insight into being a barrister and then chose the solicitor path and then actually started the GDL and then got your training contract. So for people who have already started the GDL and they don't have a training contract yet, what tips can you give them? Because I know that many people usually get their contracts really quite early on at university before they sign up to all those big fees, as you mentioned. But what helped you secure that contract?
I think it was helpful to have the marks from my university degree to help bolster my application. I think the mini pupillage, the fact that I'd actually taken that step, demonstrated real desire by having gone and undertaken the GDL on my own account. I think help in your favor. And it's all about this in every job application or anything that you do. It's all about the story that you tell. And it's all about this, like, how do I demonstrate my passion, my desire to do this? And so it's anything that you can do to complement that, I think is the most important. And in those instances, you're looking really at what additional work experience are you doing, what kind of activities that you're doing that demonstrate a keen interest in an application. And we'll come to talk about my next transition in a bit, but it has always been about trying to differentiate yourself from the pack and to do so with relevant experiences. So if you're applying for a law firm that is, commercial or tech orientated or something like that, then go and work for free as an intern in a startup, or go and work for free as a paralegal, do work for the Citizen Advice Bureau, do all of these types of things that can help bolster you as a person and as a suitable candidate.
I think that's very valuable advice. It is about thinking strategically in terms of what evidence can you produce to these law firms.
Correct.
To show that commitment, and experiences that you can pick up along the way, because as students tend to have pockets of time when it comes to long summer vacations, etc. And instead of scooting around and enjoying yourself, actually doing some work in terms of volunteering or interning somewhere to get insights that will give you a lot more information in terms of your future commitments is really a great idea, because as you say in the interviews, it's wonderful to be able to talk about these things and say, this is why I want to join a commercial law firm, etc.
100%. And I also think in any job interview or any meeting, research is key. So if you're poorly researched on the entity that you're applying to, and you can't demonstrate more than just, I read the last piece of news that was related to that firm, and actually check the date of that piece of news that you're talking about or going to reference. If it's outdated, then that will come out immediately and will make someone interviewing you immediately pick up on that and unfavorably. So the more research you can do, the better it is. And it's not a matter of scatter approach of 50, 100 applications. It's about targeting the ones that you really want, and also trying to find any in that you can possibly find. So another thing that you'll find with lawyers is that they love to help and they love to inform and talk about what they find passionate, which is their job. And LinkedIn wasn't really as big a thing back then, but I'm pretty certain today that most lawyers, trainees, associates, or even maybe don't go all the way to partner level, but firms would be very happy to have 5-minute chat with you about their job, about their firm, if you reach out to them over LinkedIn. That shows real initiative and interest in the firm, and something that you can then say very confidently in your interview, well, I took that step, which at least would hold a lot of credence in my world if someone did that in an interview with me.
Yeah, I love that tip. If you're thinking about applying to certain firms and then reaching out in advance to especially associates who would love to share their career journey and how they're finding it, and get some real good advice from them on the challenges that the firm is facing and some real insights from them that you can then reveal in your interview, I think would be really powerful and show just how dedicated you are to that particular firm. Because I think the reality is that most young people are applying to a number of firms. You have to, that's the reality. But at the same time, there are some that you'd want to go to more than others. And so being able to demonstrate that this one really is number one on your list, and look, I've contacted these people and they've told me this about the firm, and these are the reasons why I really want to join your firm. So for example, you've got all those languages, and I know you spent some time in Paris as well. So did you play on your language capabilities, etc.?
I have to think back at exactly what I put in my Brown application back in the day. But I definitely did. I mean, I definitely put a lot of emphasis on what that meant to me in terms of wanting to have an international career, wanting to work within business. And in all honesty, all of these tips and tricks that I'm now telling you today, I probably didn't use those at the time. I mean, I know I didn't. So, it was far more of a click and hope, I think, probably at the time than it was anything else. But I think with hindsight, which is always good, I would have maybe gone further down the process on a number of other firms as well, had I used some of those tips and tricks. But yeah, absolutely. I continue and will always talk about the internationalization piece, because I think for me, that's the love and the desire to meet and to interact with people from other cultures is something that is very deep in me, and something that I think I give out to other people. The other elements are demonstrating the ability to work ridiculous hours and commitments to those is also something that's quite important. Those things. But yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you say, quite honestly, that it's easy with hindsight, but it's true that at the time you didn't necessarily put these tips into practice for yourself. But this is why we have this sort of podcast, right? It's so that people who have trodden the path already can tell young people what it is that helped them along the way, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It gives them that bit of acceleration that they need. So it's very much about mentoring and passing on good advice. So thanks for that. So tell me, though, about your time as a trainee ISDA negotiator at SocGen.
Yeah, so with Mayor Brown, we went on, the LPC was at Kaplan Law School, but because at the time, and this will happen, is that you either start in March or you start in September, depending on what intake you are. I assume that's still the case today. And I finished, obviously, law school in June and then didn't start till March the following year. And so I wanted to start advancing my career earlier than waiting for the training contract to start. And so I had a friend who had done a similar thing, had been waiting actually for nearly 2 years for their training contract to start, and had worked at SocGen as it is the contract negotiator. And so I decided to apply. And so I joined, and I wanted to work for part of the time in that 9 months, and then I wanted to go skiing for 2 months. So I also wanted something that was relatively well paid. So I joined that team and I learned a huge amount of what it was like to actually be in a workplace, what it was like to more than just for a work experience for a prolonged period of time. Started developing some finance law skills and knowledge, and an understanding of terminology was at the time and ended up being what I wanted to qualify into anyway. And so I was kind of getting a head start, was kind of my feeling. And yeah, I mean, it was a pretty diverse role from the beginning, being much like any kind of trainee. You're quite simple jobs to borderline administrative jobs, photocopying signatures, that kind of stuff, starting to understand what all of those things really sort of entailed. And then bit by bit got involved with some more of the training and got up to speed. That meant that I could start doing some of the negotiations and some of the contracts. And it was an in-house experience before being fully qualified. And it was invaluable, really, to the future things that I did. And it was interesting because now looking at legal tech, how much of that was kind of a precursor to it, but we can come to that. It was far more, cookie cutter kind of work compared to the stuff that I then did at Mayor Brown and Milbank. So it was a great experience and met some really wonderful people as part of it as well, who I continue to be friends with today, all who went, a number of other people at my level ended up going as trainees to lots of different firms, and we all sort of kept a pretty good a network going off that already.
Sounds like it was a really fortuitous event that actually you had that gap that enabled you to do that in-house stint and get all of that valuable insight and extra training that was then relevant for later on.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, again, I think in every of your career, you should always be looking at what the next steps are. Really, it's like, where do I want to be in 5 years' time? Where do I want to be in 4 years' time? And am I giving myself all the tools to be able to achieve that? And that doesn't necessarily mean that those come from your job, your direct job, or your future job. It can be, and in most instances has to be, what you do on the side that help complement that job. And I think that's always, particularly early on in a career, you need to think about those things a lot, because you're trying to market yourself continuously, and those things really differentiate you.
Absolutely. So thinking about the training contract that you had at Mayor Brown, what about choosing the area to qualify into? Was that a lot linked to the fact that you had been at SocGen, or did you already have quite clear ideas of the direction you wanted to go in?
I think I knew from the off, hence joining a firm like Mayor Brown, was that my interests were within corporate or finance type work. And I ended up doing a seat in the finance team the first time, and then financial regulation. And then I went and did 6 months abroad in Paris, which was really great. I made that happen. So I asked to go to the Paris office on the basis that I spoke fluent French and could work in French, and that I really wanted to do that. And so Mayor Brown were amazing, actually, at helping facilitate. It wasn't straightforward to get them to agree to it, but they did agree to it. And it was really a wonderful experience. And then I did my last seat in insurance. And I think I'd kind of already decided that I wanted to join the finance team by that right at the beginning. And either it was because of the SocGen or as a result of the SocGen experience, I kind of felt that was what I was most capable at. And so that's what I wanted to go down. As I went to qualify in the finance team, they didn't actually have a place for me in that intake. So they were looking to put me on secondment for a period of time, but with no guarantee of what might come after. And I think that happens a lot. It's not talked about very much, but it happens a lot. And it was very good that they had an opportunity for me to go in-house for a period of time. But for me, I really wanted to go ahead with my career, and particularly my interests were very much around ultimately project finance. And I'd done a bit at Mayor Brown, but I felt that my interest really did lie in that, from lots of other things that were going on in my life at the time. And so I wanted to go down that route. And Milbank are arguably one of the leading firms in that area that was different to Mayor Brown. And I had a great interviewing experience with Milbank and got a job offer very, very quickly. They were a really smooth process, and I joined a week after leaving Mayor Brown. And so I was an NQ at Milbank at that moment.
Great. So it sounds like you were able to find a position as an associate doing project finance. So what was it like at that point, being an associate and moving into a new area of law, and what sort of general challenges did you face?
I think there's a big step change in terms of your overarching responsibility from being a trainee to an associate. Generally speaking, although at the time at Milbank that they didn't have any trainees. And so as a junior associate, you were still at the bottom of the ladder, basically. And so I think some of the work that I was doing was amazing in Milbank, but the people that you work with are very bright, very motivated, very passionate, very, very strong in their practice areas. But you kind of had to, I was sort of slightly schizophrenic maybe at times, because on one side, I was having to do these really great pieces of work, and on the other side, really mundane trainee tasks still. And I think that was the biggest challenge, trying to meet those two and to still want to do the really mundane trainee tasks, I think was quite a challenge when moving into the associate position. But I think what that taught me, and there's famous sort of statements from the New Zealand All Blacks team, it's all about sweeping the sheds and like cleaning after and doing all the hard work in order to then progress and to be there. And I think, if nothing else, doing all of those tasks late into the night after night really does give you a resilience and an ability to work continuously at a certain level that you don't get from any other kind of professional experience, and one that I still carry to this day. Maybe it's simply a mind shift change that means that I find that totally normal, that it's normalized at all. You do get sort of indoctrinated, but it's not for the faint-hearted, because it is really tough. Like, it was very tough. The first 6 months or so, I was on a very big transaction that we did. Everyone there was working all day, every day, all night, for many weekends. And it was amazing that the team that was there, actually, we all got on very well and worked hard all together. And that element of collaboration and camaraderie is amazing. But it is tough, and you have to make quite big personal sacrifices to be able to continue in that kind of route in that career.
Is that what led you to moving into becoming a sort of independent consultant?
So after about 2 and a bit years at Milbank, I started thinking about, well, what is my progression looking like here? Do I want to go along that path, and do I want to go through to maybe one day making partner, or at least working towards that? And I think the answer to that ultimately for me was that no, I didn't see that was where I wanted to head. And there were many different reasons for that. But I also felt that I wanted to be more on the business end of things. So being a private practice lawyer was great, but it was going to take me a very long time to actually be strategically important in a transaction. So being able to actually give the level of advice, or being hand to hand with the business or commercial teams on a deal to really influence it. And I kind of was hungry for that really at that point, and I felt that seemed too far away for me. And so I started actually on the side. Amazing that I actually found time on the side, but I did find time on the side on weekends and in the evenings to working with a friend of mine who was an accountant, who was also going through that similar kind of mindset. Was, well, could we work in startups, and what would working for a startup look like? And what does it mean to run your own business as a startup? And all of those kind of questions that you have no idea. Sat from your training contract associate background, you have no idea what it actually really is. And so we ended up going to a few sort of startup meetups and events, talking to people and going, well, would you like help, basically? And so the two of us ended up sort of setting up, we called it grandly, Startup Capital Advisors was what we called ourselves. And we ultimately, in most parts, worked for free for startups, doing basic legal advice, contracts, modeling, financial modeling, business plans, all of that kind of stuff, grant applications, you name it, for about 6 or 7 startups over the course of 6 months or so, in all manners, all types of things. Some fintech, and then a chocolate business, and a restaurant pop-up chain, and all sorts of interesting things. And one of the fun projects that we did, we were trying to scope out for a restaurant why they should choose a particular site or not. And so I went at lunchtime for a week every day and sat in a cafe that was across the road from the place that we thought might be a good site. And I just counted the number of people that came in and the kinds of orders that they made to try and get an understanding of what we could actually make and build into the model. So it was really fun. It was kind of like our hobby. And so that kind of gave me that sort of drive. I was like, well, I'd like to move into potentially that kind of world, but I didn't feel that I could leave all of that legal world behind me, having worked so hard to get to that, and that I should probably use that as a springboard into something else. And so I met Campbell Unsworth, who was the head of General Standards in the UK. And General Standards is an Australian-based firm, but that had a lawyer in New York and a lawyer in London that was representing them there. And the idea was that General Standards was that all documentation for early stage startups ought to be a general standard for them. And the idea was that we were going to create a semi-automated law firm, and that the advice that we were giving was what people were paying for, and that the documentation was going to write for itself. Now what we call legal tech, basically, right? And although that was already sort of coming up, but really like a Seed Legals and those types of companies that have come through now was very much planning on building. And I thought that was really exciting. And so I joined CAM. And yeah, we had a great sort of 18 months working together on over 100 startups in that period of time, doing investment rounds, terms and conditions, employment agreements, trademarking, master services agreements, all manners of things that up until that point I hadn't ever done. And so it was about using, CAB was at 6 years more qualified than I was, and we had a very good bank of precedents that we'd created, and still had access to PLC and things. And so we were just using our skills as trained lawyers to work with startups. And during that period, it was a mixture of going to lots of meetups and trying to find clients. So suddenly I was doing business development, because I had to go and actually find my clients. Then I had to deliver the work for them and do the billing and invoicing and onboarding and et cetera. All these things that had previously relied on a support function to do or not even been involved with, I was now having to learn at the same time as a new area of law. So it was amazing. I'll thank CAM and General Standards forever for that sort of transition period that allowed me to, I learned more in those 18 months than I've done probably ever or since. It was such a condensed amount of learning and change in my career.
Sounds like the ideal background for running your own startup in terms of practicing on everybody else's contracts first. But what a great insight. And obviously being on the other side of the table, looking at all those exciting businesses meant that you were thinking about startups for yourself. And so although you were with General Standards and in a semi-startup situation, it was still very much the law side. And so tell me a bit about the Techstars-Barclay's tech accelerator.
Yeah, so I think we weren't quite getting to the point where we were going to create this automated law firm. And I also think that we were actually spent so much time trying to service clients that we didn't have time, headspace to do any of that. And so I really wanted to kind of explore an alternative and see what it was like. So the being a business associate for the Techstars program was a 3-month piece. And I actually kept doing some work with CAM for General Standards at the same time and sort of kept those two things going along. And it was an amazing experience, because I obviously people called on me for my legal advice, because there's 10 startups on the accelerator for a 3-month period, all going from either having a product or about to launch a product, needing lots of advice around those different elements to it. But then also got involved with product, got involved with sales, got involved with all of the additional sort of discussions with mentors and the whole Techstars ecosystem, which meant, again, it was like a sort of a startup MBA really for over 3 months of learning the 101s of what you need to do for a founding business. So it's kind of complemented very well the stuff I've been doing at General Standards. And so it gave me an additional layer of knowledge and understanding of that. So I think there's a general theme that I keep trying to de-risk my next step by doing lots of pre-planning work to doing that. And then on the Techstars, it was Pete, who was the founder of Shieldpay. And I got on very well with him, believed in the product, and was offered to join him as part of the founding team. So when it was, ended up being 4 of us at the beginning, 5 of us at the beginning.
It sounds like you really set yourself up very well in terms of the experience and the insights that you got in the types of environment that you wanted to be in before actually taking the plunge yourself. So I think that's very wise, and certainly that's something that people can think about when it comes to trying something out before, so that it's definitely what you want to do. And so tell me about Shieldpay and what problems it solves and what you actually do there.
Like in any startup, you end up wearing lots of different hats. And I think I've had about 5 different hats at Shieldpay. But Shieldpay started its life as a peer-to-peer escrow solution, so providing an ability for people to use Escrow to purchase on items online on online marketplaces. At the same time, we always had the ambition to provide Escrow solutions to the legal industry or the banking industry, where the usage of Escrow or protected payments is much more commonplace in M&A or real estate, but is still pretty archaic, hasn't moved in 10 years. And there's a long onboarding process, complex documentation for what actually is a not so complex or shouldn't be such a complex thing. And so that obviously was something that I knew pretty well from being on the transactional side of the law. And it was actually by meeting with the Solicitors Regulation Authority, the SRA, who were in the process of changing their accounts rules to allow law firms to stop holding client funds in transactions and maybe looking at this alternative. And they were in a process of encouraging that. That prompted us to create a secondary product, which was this servicing law firms piece. And I led that kind of breakaway, I guess, product that now is our most successful part of the business, which is we provide what are termed third-party managed accounts to law firms and lenders, so these outsourced clients account functions, but then we also provide corporate escrow, longer-term corporate escrow, and paying agent services. So the issues that we solve for are any payment solutions for professional services companies. So whether it's holding funds at the end of a mergers and acquisitions transaction for the earnout of certain employees, or in a real estate transaction where there are funds held back for dilapidations or whatever it may be, on the one side. And then on the other side, we do mass payouts for sort of litigation settlements. So we will be doing a 22,000 person payout in a few weeks' time, where we do the onboarding and the paying out of those people. So we check the identities of people and that the account to which we're sending the funds actually belongs to that person, and then make the payouts on behalf of the firm.
Well, it's very interesting how it started as sort of quite a simple idea, the escrow idea, but how it's really evolved into so many things. And certainly when I looked on your blog, I saw a description of a chain of houses. And that's always such a nightmare when it comes to British real estate transactions, where you've got this chain and you're literally waiting there with the removal company and you're not sure if you're going to get the keys that day, and horrible things go wrong. But now that you're talking about outsourcing of the client accounts and all of these other services that you're offering, it's pretty amazing how you can evolve and spot opportunities and come up with different solutions within the same concept, but just in different applications. So where do you see it going in future?
I think we'll find that where we're looking to go to is to replace the need for any professional services that hold client money, which is ancillary to their actual activity, to remove their need to do so. And so by protecting consumers and customers and the regulated entities themselves, that's where we'd like to be. And we believe that law firms and other professional services should do what they're good at. And I think we'll go to a world of far more specialization in that field. And then the rest of it will be handled by alternative providers. And so the outsourcing of non-core functions will become much more relevant, much more prevalent. And that goes to the same extent in relation to the using contract automation platforms for certain tasks that won't necessarily be done by lawyers. Payments shouldn't be done by the law firm. The onboarding of clients, a law firm is a law firm. They're paid for thinking. They shouldn't be spending their time doing administrative, if at all possible. And so for us, we're part of the wider picture of the transaction management lifecycle. And so we form one part of it. And I think being interconnected with all those parts is where we'd like to be. So integrated with as many solutions that can hang off that. And I know you interviewed not so long ago Giles from Avoca, and their contract platform could, be linked via API to our underlying payments technology, and all of that will become seamless in time. And I think that's what's kind of where I see the future, and what I think is going to be really exciting is far bigger penetration where we are here in the UK, but then more broadly, it's like advances on the product and what's the art of the possible is with the interconnectedness of legal technology.
Definitely, it's a really exciting space to be in right now. And if you think of, as you just said, the UK and how advanced it is in that sphere, but the potential across the globe, especially where there are less sophisticated payment mechanisms, and think of third world countries where even banking, etc., is not as developed. So there are great opportunities for internationalization. So when are you coming to Singapore?
Very soon is our hope. So we do actually have an entity there that is like dormant at the moment that we're waiting to start up. So we're looking at that in the next sort of 18 months or so. We'll be coming to Singapore. Our goal is to create an international and cross-border functionality there. And it's something that we're deeply passionate about to have. You're limited by regulation at the moment, having to become regulated in different countries. But ultimately, we want to be able to facilitate this for law firms and for clients and also for individuals anywhere in the world to be able to have those payment rails. So I'll let you know for sure when I'll be coming over.
Fantastic. So what's the best way for people to connect with you, Geoff?
Please feel free to connect me on LinkedIn or email, and listen to my podcast as well if you want to hear more about my musings on all of this. It's called the Shieldcast, and I'll hopefully be able to provide a link via you, Laura.
Absolutely. I will share any links in the show notes so that people can reach out to you. So thanks very much for being on the show today.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Legal Genie podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, rate and review it on Apple Podcasts to help me reach more listeners. If you are a lawyer who is stuck, but you're motivated to try and move forward, why not book a 30-minute no-obligation chemistry session to see if I could be the coach for you? You can book an appointment through my website at laraquieassociates.com. The link is in the show notes.